I figured, well, that just means he's done this test before, but I don't remember any discussion about it afterwards. I let him out of the handcuffs, and he left. It was about 2 weeks after the incident with me in the handcuffs that John Vukovic went missing.
There was a bunch of us in the room listening to him tell his story. Sometime during the night, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, Gacy started talking about Butkovich, one of the victims.
But the strongest feelings I have for him was with Butkovich.
John Butkovich was a good kid. He was working for Gacy. He was a laborer. They're like any other kid looking for a job.
John Vukovic and I worked together on projects for John. As a matter of fact, we used to call John Vukovic Little John, because of course John Gacy was Big John. I really only buddied up with John Vukovic. We had a bond because we both had similar hot rod type cars. We were both Mopar men. You ain't got a Mopar, you ain't got no car, it's the same.
John Butkovich came to work for me. Very naive kid. I treated him on a father-son relationship. Also got into a sexual relationship with him. Him blowing me and me blowing him.
John Butkovich, a teenager, had used to work for Gacy. He just up and disappeared.
John Butkovich's mom was very instrumental in trying to put the heat on the police to find her son.
We feel so bad because police don't do nothing.
The Chicago police didn't care. Okay, your son's a runaway. He's a wild kid. He'll show up someday. If a young person was missing, or an old person was missing for that matter, the police wouldn't do anything about it. In the meantime, these people who are missing would slip through the cracks.
When John Vukovic went missing, I asked John about it because I said, am I going to be working with Little John on this project? And he's like, yeah, no, Little John is quit. Teenagers tend to just, without a lot of forethought, I quit. I didn't really question it. What I thought was unusual was that John Vukovic just left his car, knowing how important his car was to him.
It was 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. We drove all the way out to my house. We drank, we smoked a couple of joints, then he started getting belligerent.
Gacy said Butkovich was arguing with Gacy over pay that he believed was owed to him. All he wanted to do was get his pay.
He was quitting, but he was pissed off. But the handcuffs were right there at the bar. I just let the handcuffs on. And one arm, then I grabbed his other arm, I handcuffed it. After I got the handcuffs on, I said, now John, I see you're not going to fight with nobody.
According to Gacy's statements, he had strangled John Butkovich to death.
The next thing I remember is I woke up in bed. I walked in there, and the first thing I come upon was his feet. He had the hook on his neck. He was dead. I didn't know what the hell to do. I went out to the garage. I dug the hole as big as I could. I pushed him in it, and then I cemented it over.
Gacy, he was just beginning. He was just learning how much he enjoyed it and how he could get away with it and how he had a pattern that worked.
So I got away with the first one. I think was getting away with him. That's why I didn't stop.
That's about to get
There was a change in the marriage from that point forward.
Carol asked for a divorce in 75. She got a divorce in February of 76 and moved out. It was an unhealthy situation because people in the neighborhood were making remarks about me. I would go out drinking, and I know I was cruising down at the park.
As Gacy just continued talking, he told us it started on Bughouse Square of the Greyhound station.
Bughouse Square was one of a number of different places where gay men often met sexual partners. You have to remember there weren't a lot of alternatives, especially for people who really had to be closeted, which was most of us at the time.
because there's one way all the way around. You go around, keep going around the circle, looking for whoever you're looking for, and that's where Gacy patrolled.
Generally, I looked for young, clean-cut, virile looking. I felt that I would probably have the upper hand or the fatherly image over them. In other words, the innocent ones. Those were the ones I'd pick out.
At the start, he talked about he was able to get these kids to his car. He could entice them with drugs or pay for a new job or something like that.
I certainly imagine that if you're a teenager and you're trying to survive on the streets, you're going to do things that to an outsider might look like crazy or risk-taking, but you didn't really have a choice.
And Gacy got to be pretty good at picking these kids up and bringing them back to his house.
But when you're busier than hell, you want to satisfy yourself more. Could it be that through seeking out different people for sex, that I developed a hatred for them? You bought them for an hour, you bought them for 2 hours, you bought their bodies. Do what you want with it. They're, to me, they're not a human being. It's like you go into the store. If you buy something, you bring it home and you decide you don't like it and you want to break it, it's yours to break because you paid for it.
When we were getting statements from Gacy, we didn't have time to react a lot. You were kind of going from one thing to the next a lot of times, and he just continued talking.
Until 6 o'clock in the morning. It was hours of him rambling.
Now, in all these years' experience I had, I think I might have been stronger as a lawyer now, keeping his mouth shut. But he thought he could manipulate the police. Gacy opening his mouth, fussing,
rounded over here.
If he was helpful to them, then he'd probably get away
Never
with
tell
something.
me Superstore.
That was his
I'm
plan.
not fucking going there, especially with random ass people.
At the same time that we were in the Des Plaines Police Department talking to Gacy, the police officers were at the house. That's really when all the fireworks started.
It was early in the morning. Whatever was there, we had to find it. So we took down the wall. We started pulling up the floor. We were writing the book, so to speak.
This was 1978. Nobody knew about PPEs. We had no overalls. We had no face masks. I wore jeans and I had a couple of rugby shirts that I wore because they were warm.
No one had ever had to handle anything like this before. And at the time, I didn't know what the totality of this thing was going to be.
Looking east towards the open floor in the office area. Now we're going to be walking along. We'll pan along. All right, now we're looking west towards that bedroom. Now we're going to pan down along the floor, turn around, come up into the kitchen area. Quick pan across the top of the kitchen, then we'll pan down through the hole in the floor.
And they just kept coming, one after another.
We're basically in graves with dead bodies. And these weren't bodies in the sense that we understand them. These were mostly skeletons, but in some cases the body was quite intact, but still very decomposed.
They were in all directions, face up, face down, two bodies side by side, a number of ways. One body was recovered near the barbecue grill that was behind the house along the driveway.
Butkovich's body was in the back by the garage, buried underneath the cement slab in the back of the shed.
Back when John Bukovich went missing, I was in the garage and the floor was all new concrete. And I was thinking back, there was no reason to patch that floor. Sure enough, that Vukovich was.
The enormity of it all was mind-boggling.
The saving of the corpse and storing him in the basement. It was a hiding place. It was a secret place. Those are my bodies. That's why I wanted to keep them. They had no right to touch them.
We got a couple more pads. We're gonna need a body bag down here. What down there?
When we found these bodies, it verified Gacy's story.
They're still excavating bodies from the house, and he said he was going to clear up a whole stack of murders.
Gacy described in detail every single murder he committed.
A lot of his victims came with him voluntarily.
Some were involved in criminal activities, there's no doubt. They came from money or drugs or sex. Some of them he let go. Others he murdered.
They were male prostitutes. At least that's what Gacy told us. So who knew what the truth was? He said that if they charged more money after the sex act, if it was a $20 deal and they wanted 50, or if they just threatened to out him to people in the community, those were the reasons that he killed them.
But these kids, they weren't all prostitutes. Great majority of these victims of John Gacy were just looking for a job.
That was probably one of the scariest things about Gacy. No rhyme or reason. When you can be walking down the street, or a 15-year-old kid working in a drugstore, and have Gacy lay eyes on you, you have now become his next victim. That's scary.
How did he choose? It was not so much a type of person that he got, it was the ability to get him back to his house.
For Gacy, he had different MOs, let's put it that way.
John's Oldsmobile. It was a late model, black, not a fancy car, but it had that spotlight on it. It was a police accessory, I think.
Enfrente. I got a black car, which looked like a squad car, but I never impersonated a cop and never said I was a cop. However, there was occasions when I picked up people, and they would say, "You're a cop, huh? Yeah, I'll do anything you want. Just don't bust me." I got a lot of free sex just by letting them plant their own seeds and letting them grow.
And he had some 50-some different badges from different police departments. He had a black leather jacket that he wore all the time that would very much look like a plainclothes police officer attire.
They thought they were getting arrested, and it turns out they were being kidnapped.
He was able to con these kids by various ways to be able to get them into his clutches.
They lived in different areas of the city or suburbs. These people just vanished right off the face of the earth, and they were never connected to Gacy.
He could have anybody he wanted. Well, he would bring them all back to the house, and all he had to do would be able to dispose of the body.
Usually somebody disappears, they show up in the morgue someplace. These people just vanished into the crawl space.
As we dug and we kept coming up with more bodies, obviously the first thought in your mind was, just how many are there?
Almost all of them had something a little different about them. Either the position they were in. In some cases, we found ligatures around their neck. A ligature, in this case, was a rope with a knot in the back of it. You would just torture these kids, is what we surmised what was happening.
Back at the station, the guy's talking, he's telling us about these homicides. He enjoyed it. He enjoyed the fact that he was the center of attention.
When I arrived at the police station, Mike Albrecht and I went back in. I remember asking Gacy a lot of things, but what I remember most of all was how he killed his victims. He told us he would bring the boys back to his house and show them a magic trick.
And the first trick he was going to show was the handcuff trick. He would put the handcuffs on himself, fumble around for a little bit, and then the handcuffs would come off. And then he would tell the kids, okay, now you're going to do the handcuff trick.
Of course, around with the handcuffs. I said, put them on and I'll show you how to take them off without the keys. I said, it's mind over matter, you can take them off.
So they would obviously struggle then and try to get out of the handcuffs, and they couldn't get out of the handcuffs.
After you get the handcuffs on them, he says, how do you get them off? I said, you don't need the key.
Once the kid put the handcuffs on, it was a game over. Now Gacy can do with them what he wants.
I was pretty shaken at this point. I remember I said, well, I gotta show you how I did it. So bring me a rope and I'll show you.
I'm not going to get you a rope.
And he said, okay, let's do it this way. He pulled out a rosary and he touched my hand. He said, pretend your fist is a head and pretend your wrist is a neck, okay?
And Gacy wrapped his rosary around his wrist.
Take a rope, tie it around your wrist, just with a slip knot. Okay, so when you put the first slip knot in, then lay a pencil on it, and then put another slip knot right over it. Now take the stick part and turn it, and see what happens to your wrist.
And very gently, he twisted.
Once you put a rope around their neck, you turn it 2 or 3 times to get tight. And then as they start to get excited, they fucking pass out. You got this son of a bitch. You can't do a fucking thing to you, you know that? And then you just leave.
They couldn't fight back, and they were murdered, strangled.
That's a very personal way of killing somebody. It's not like using a gun. If you're going to strangle somebody, you got to be right on top of them. You don't do that without liking it.
What he discovered was the thrill of deciding who would live and who would die, and how much he enjoyed all that evil.
I'm pretty good about compartmentalizing myself. I had a system. I had a big coin that I carried in my pocket when I worked. When I got home, I threw the coin in the ashtray. That's where the job stayed. The next morning, I put the coin in my pocket. I'm back on duty. I never let it come into my house.
People always say to me, doesn't that stuff bother you? And I say, we're there for the dead. Somebody loved this kid. How many people do we have here who have just disappeared? And that leaves an empty hole in many people's lives. You have to try and bring those people closure.
When Mike disappeared for over 2 years, people were always asking questions. And being in gatherings, like if we were at a wedding or at a birthday party where people would kind of go off and whisper about what was going on, what was happening. I was scared a lot. And I was scared to ask questions about what had happened. And then we got the phone call at Christmas time in 1978. I ran into the kitchen and my mom, and I just remember the light being really bright on her and my mom just being really sharp with her answers. And then just putting the phone down and walking over to my dad and saying, Larry, it's about Mike. And like everything else feels like the way I remember it is all underwater because everything got very dark after that.
One of the things Mr. Gacy was doing was he would hide little things that he had saved from his victims.
They had found Michael's fishing license in Gacy's house. That's when I started watching the news and seeing a lot of the footage. I was very young. I didn't understand. That was our story that was happening in front of me.
Police today found 6 more bodies under the John Gacy house in Norwood Park Township near Des Plaines, Illinois. The 6 bodies bring the total found under this house and garage to 15, all appearing to have been teenage boys and young men.
Trash,
Everyone
bro, trash.
was in shock from talking about kids, you know, my age, all the way to the parents in the neighborhood. Just in shock.
You see bodies in your sleep, you see him in your sleep. It's just too much.
The media was all over the place. They wanted to to try to get whatever angle they could.
Please confine yourself to the front for right now.
Every time he stepped out the door, somebody was filming him. Somebody was trying to ask you a question.
It was like a circus.
Gacy was an international news.
Every day there was a headline in the newspaper about another body being found. Yeah, I didn't take this case for publicity, and all of a sudden I found myself in the middle of this pervasive journalism and news media from all over the world.
The search for more bodies under the home of suspected sex killer John Gacy.
John Wayne Gacy.
John Gacy.
John Gacy. John Wayne Gacy.
I'm watching the news and there's John Gacy on TV and I'm yelling at my wife. That's the guy. That's the guy that did this. I remember how deadly scared I was in his presence back in January of 1967. I very easily could have been one of those skeletons that they found, those young boys that he killed. I can't imagine what they went through, but I do know the frightful face they would see.
Head to the north, feet to the south. The remains are still being filmed.
For days and days, we kept digging them out. And the numbers were racking up higher and higher.
Police found 6 more bodies today. That brings the total at the house to 21.
You know, you're talking about having, 20 some odd bodies already. It was pretty horrible to see it.
We had to put flags into the crawl space, numbered for the different bodies that were found there, because that's all we had at that time were numbers.
We're looking for Robert Peace 10 days at most. All these bodies down here were all blackened from the decomposition of the flesh. They had been there for a long time. That was the big issue.
No sign of Rob Peace anywhere. We were concerned at that point with finding Rob Peace's body, but it wasn't in the house.
We needed to find Rob Peace.
We started talking with Gacy. We asked him, well, where's the Peace body? And then he said, well, I can't really say. And we said, is he buried someplace? And Gacy answered, he says, well, he's not above ground and he's not below ground. And we think, what the hell does that mean?
He acted like it was all a big bother to him. He was arrogant.
All of a sudden, Gacy leaned back in his chair a little bit, kind of tenses up, and closed his eyes, and he's like that for a few seconds. And then he started talking.
Do you want to know something? It seems funny right now, but I've had a couple of visions. There's a road and it leads to nothing. I picture the goddamn bank of the river where the road ends. It's like going up a ramp of a bridge, and then there's water. I can see something going into the water. There's something in the river. Just leave Peace where he's at. Assume that he's at the other water.
The curious lined the ropes around John Gacy's home, drawn to the scene by reports of bodies being dug out of the crawl space.
News of the multiple murders has brought scores of people to the scene, some interested in finding missing loved ones.
My wife's brother's been missing for a couple of years. He went to a concert a couple of years ago, and well, she said it's on television. she wanted to come over here and talk to the police because there's a possibility that, you know, he may show up.
It's a case that changed my entire life and a lot of people's lives. Divorces happened, families broke up, people were destroyed, their whole family, the victims' families. People don't see the fallout from a case like that.
I think that my dad beat himself up because I think any parent feels when something this horrifying happens, they need to have some answers. He would say things like, you know, why did Mike have to die? How come guys like me get to live? It was a very heavy weight on him, and I also think it made him try to figure out his place in the world, which carried over for me.
Harold Peace, Rob Peace's father. I picked him up one day and brought him in the office because I had some questions for him. I told Harold, I said, look, I said, you've been asking yourself, why Rob, why him, why my son? And I had been thinking the same thing. And I thought about it a lot, and because it bothered me, you know. I mean, I had a boy of my own at the time. Casey never laid eyes on Rob Pease until that day. There was no rhyme or reason. I told Harold, I said, the best thing you could do is to think of it as if Rob had been struck by lightning, because nothing else made any sense. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that nightmares are made of. That's how John Gacy was. He decided that's going to be his next victim. And it was. And I wanted to do anything I could to find Robert Pease.
Investigators today unearthed 6 more bodies at his home in a Chicago suburb. 21 bodies now have been found at Gacy's home.
It was December of 1978. They're still excavating bodies from the house.
You're ready to stand here. Body 27 was the worst thing I've ever had to do in my whole life. We couldn't break him loose from the mud. I'm kneeling right over him like this and started working my hands under his back. I finally reached out to the point where I had no more leverage. So I thought, my God, what am I going to do? So I took my fingers and shoved him right up into the rib cage, through the flesh, and pulled. We got him loose. We were just all sweating, exhausted. I'll never forget that feeling. And that was the end of Friday after Christmas.
And as the bodies were discovered, it was becoming more and more obvious that it was going to be a monumental job to identify who these people were that were in the crawl space.
The process of identification is slow. It's similar to an archaeological dig, where bones are tagged and cataloged. The police ask relatives of missing teenagers to send dental records, because in most cases, those will be the only way to identify the dead.
DNA was not used in criminal work until 1986. In 1978, one of the few ways that you could identify a person if there were no fingerprints available would be through the teeth.
How are we doing the teeth up there? Fine. Teeth are fine. Good condition. You got a whole set there, right? Yeah.
They assumed they'd be deluged with phone calls, but it hasn't happened.
Well, I think originally the case had a lot of sexual overtones. I think some people have shied away from thinking their children might be involved in this.
To be gay in the 1970s, it was a different world.
What is a homosexual? Is he or she a person who has simply chosen an alternate sexual life? Or a mentally sick person who, like any other, should be treated by whatever resources the psychiatric profession has? That question, that debate has generated a small civil war in the psychiatric establishment.
The early 70s and late 70s, they didn't have the respect. Nobody really had anybody advocating for them. And I think it reflected on how the police treated them.
A careful examination of police and other official documents by Eyewitness News reveals that John Gacy came into contact with authorities more than half a dozen times, allegedly involved in crimes ranging from kidnapping to rape and assault.
I think the lack of trust between the gay community and the police had probably made it even less likely that crimes against young people would be reported or believed if they were reported.
Jeffrey Rignall was a gay young man, was picked up by Gacy. He offered him some marijuana. Gacy took a rag that he had chloroform on it and put it on Jeffrey Rignall's face and made him pass out. Gacy had him at the house. He put him in this 2x4, he had holes in it, interlaced a chain through it where he kept his ankles and his wrists together, basically, bent him over, and violated him with a very large sex toy and kept him there for a period of time.
Found myself about 5:30 in the morning on the steps right by Lincoln Park, half dressed, my face completely burned.
You see a lot of burns on his face from the chloroform that he put on it. Jeffrey Rignall told the police that he had been raped, and that's the way it should have been treated. However, it was treated more like one gay guy on another gay guy, and there wasn't much urgency to it.
The police took the matter very, very lightly, and I felt that, it wasn't a light matter.
I think it's quite likely that police and other authorities had a hard time understanding that rape can occur between men. The notion of a man being the victim, I think it was hard culturally to understand.
He did give him a brief description of Gacy, but with very little to go on, and frankly, I'm ashamed to say this about fellow police officers, but they dropped the ball on that. And so Rignall took it upon himself to try to find John Wayne Gacy. When Gacy was driving Jeffrey Rignall to his house, his exit to get off the expressway to get to his house was Cumberland Avenue. And that's the sign that Jeffrey Rignall saw during one of the brief times he woke up before he was knocked out again. So he rented a car and went out there and parked at that exit of the expressway. Ultimately did see Gacy's car, got the license plate number, the address, went back to the police, gave them the information, and Gacy was arrested. As a matter of fact, Gacy was out on bond on that charge when we arrested him from the outsides.
I'm just thankful that I woke up in the park instead of underneath this foundation.
It's very disturbing how many murders happened before Gacy was caught. It's one of the most horrifying aspects of his crimes. And one has to wonder whether he could have been caught sooner. That's a haunting question.
A few days after the digging started, when Gacy was in the police department, Mike was the first one, I think, that said, "Tell us where these people are buried." And Gacy started to say, "Well, in the north part," and I stopped him. I said, "Look, I don't have a good sense of direction."
Gacy said, "Just give me a piece of paper, I'll show you where they're at."
So he drew a perimeter He drew an N on the top. He said, that's north. He would show us where the concrete supports were and the heater. And then he said, well, you know, here, these are graves that I buried some people in. And there was a bunch of rectangles and numbers and hash marks, things like that.
Then he would proceed to go all the way around the crawl space area.
After Gacy finished the diagram, he handed it back, and there were 20 plus bodies, the high 20s. And then he told us that somewhere in the spring to early summer of 1978, he was all out of real estate in the crawl space.
And that's why he ended up suburban. When I was talking with Gacy after the arrest, we wanted to find where the body of Robert Peast was.
Back at the house, we were all racking our brains. What has gone on here? Where is Robert Peast? That was the big issue.
Robbie Peast was different. Robbie sort of broke the mold. It was something a little different than he had done before that.
The fact that he abducted Rob Peast with witnesses there certainly led directly to him.
Everybody accused him of story, everybody in the pictures of the story. I took his spirit without seeing the story.
There's no doubt he was getting sloppy toward the end, but he sure didn't want to be caught.
Back in December 1978, we asked him about Rob Peast, about this kid from Splinters. Well, who's that? You know, like, he didn't know who we were talking about. But Gacy eventually told us what happened. He was very descriptive of what he did with Rob Peast.
When I was driving away, this kid came running up to me. Asked if he could talk to me about a job and told me I didn't have time. He said, well, he would ride with me. He was off work. So I got in the truck, went back to my house.
He assaulted him. Rob became upset.
He was crying. I mean, he just, this is a 15-year-old boy.
Was he handcuffed at that point?
Yeah.
I put the rope around his neck. I said, see, it's loose, right? He said, yep. I took the stick put in there and put the other knot in it. I bleed. Then the phone rang.
Gacy said he went to answer the phone, and when we got off the phone, Rob Peast was on the floor dead. It was a terrible death that that kid went through, and it didn't bother Gacy in the least.
I just took him off my bed and carried him up into the attic and got him out of the way so I could go to bed. It's just like when you clear the bed off to go to bed, you know, a bunch of stuff is laying there.
The next day, police came to the door to try to get Gacy to come into the police station. And Peast's body was still in the house, but of course they didn't know that then. Gacy came back with the answer that he couldn't go to the police station because his uncle had just died and he had to make some family calls and attend to his family.
And I thought, fuckers up in the attic. They could have got me up and again. If they would have fixed the house right down there, they would have found it and ran out.
He took the body of Rob Peast, put it in his trunk, drove down I-55 to the Des Plaines River. And threw the body into the river where he had thrown other bodies. Turned around to come back. He lost control of the car. Ran off the tollway and got stuck in the mud. Finally, a state trooper came by and they called a tow truck to get him out. When they got him out, that's when he showed up at the police department just covered with mud.
Out in Des Des Plaines, 27 bodies have been found under John Gacy's house. Sheriff's deputies hope that's the end of the gruesome discoveries, but they're not sure. Gacy claims more bodies were thrown into the river.
The search for Robert Peace was negative. Nothing, no information, no evidence of anything that Rob Peace was in the Des Plaines River.
So there's still one missing from the river. And that being Robert Peace. And it could be that they're looking in the wrong river. You know, it could have been in the lake. I don't know.
I think it was right around January 1st. We had a big snowstorm, about 10 inches. Got bitterly cold.
Like it or not, we are 2 hours away from putting a new weather record in the books. We are living and shivering in what history will call the deep freeze of '79.
The blizzard was just terrible. You couldn't move at all. I mean, 10 inches, and it didn't melt because it was so cold. Then we got another huge snowstorm. We couldn't move.
Robert Peace's body wasn't discovered until April, and it took that long for his body to surface. When the body goes in ice cold water, it sinks. And it stays down until the water begins to warm up, and the body produces gas, internal gas, and the gas is what floats the body to the surface. That's why it took until April to find his body.
A team of dental experts from Cook and Will County have identified the male white body recovered from the Illinois River this afternoon as that of missing Des Plaines youth, 15-year-old Robert Peace.
What I remember from Rob's funeral, there was hundreds of people there because by then it was a community that really had a loss. And this is early days when media was present and getting in people's faces, and to have them come to the funeral was, I thought in my eyes as a teenager, how rude. All you want to do is digest the loss of your son, and it seemed to me at that time all the focus was on the criminal, not the loss of the victim.
As the roof and walls shattered, reporters and neighbors became witness to a stark frame covering to a mass grave. At first, the demolition of John Gacy's home had gone slowly, as evidence men searched, in vain it appeared, for additional clues. Then the order came, get it down as quickly and neatly as possible.
We wound up excavating the whole property, and once it was all done and flat and nice, and we were absolutely sure there was nothing there, we looked at this guy's house, what we had done to it, and the idea was we were supposed to return it to its normal state. Well, we had people from the county come in, buildings and zoning and all this sort of thing, and they said there's no way. It'd be better just to build him a new house if we had to.
26 bodies were recovered from the crawl space. One body was recovered from under the addition. Another body was recovered along the driveway, and the final body was recovered from the concrete floor of the addition to the garage that he had added. So it's 29 in total from that location.
No one has identified 9 of the teenagers. Chicago area funeral directors are furnishing caskets and burial services for the unidentified 9 so that they won't be interred as paupers.
I was appointed by the elected state's attorney, Bernard Carey, to be the first chair or the chief prosecutor of the John Gacy case.
Bill Kunkel, he put together a trial team that I thought was magnificent. He brought in Bob Egan, and brought in Terry Sullivan.
It took a little over a year to get ready for trial.
The Chicago community, along with the entire world, hated me because I was John Gacy's defense lawyer.
Today on Noon Break with Lee Simmons, Sam Amaranti talks about the role of the defense lawyer.
Do you believe that Gacy was insane at the time he committed the murder?
Yes, I do. I really believe that.
Mr. Amaranthi, has your life ever been threatened for defending John Gacy?
Yes, it was, and my family, my house as well for my family, was threatened a lot at the beginning of the case.
Not right now.
The coverage in that case was pervasive, and there were cameras and microphones in my face. But it lasted that way throughout the whole 15 months that the case was pending. This was very difficult on my family and my sons, my marriage. But you know what? Every person who steps foot in this country on American soil is protected by that Constitution. Even the John Gacy's of the world have a right to counsel, have a right to be presumed innocent. But I certainly felt anger and frustration to know that here's my client who's been doing nothing but lying to me about everything and trying to manipulate me.
I heard you told me you killed a lot of them.
Oh, shit, yes. And I don't know what I told you. Because I don't even know if I killed them. I don't even think I killed any of them. And I'm not denying it. I'm in a hell of a mess as it is. Whether I deny it or not, don't make no difference. Don't you understand that?
I really needed help desperately in this case. I was all alone. I knew Bob Mata from the public defender's office, and Bob was a very good trial lawyer. And I called him, and he was Johnny on the spot. He came out, and we worked on the entire case together.
I didn't feel that John Gacy, the first time I met him, would be crawling up the walls or drooling and like a savage, because he had a successful business. I thought he was cunning, manipulative, a clever liar.
Right from the beginning, once the bodies were recovered from his house, you know, it's patently obvious that he's factually guilty, A, and B, he's going to be convicted of factual guilt if he tries any defense known other than insanity. And so it's an insanity case.
The classic insanity defense would be the John Hinckley defense. He shot President Reagan. He had this neurotic compulsion, which is a mental disease. He was out there for the whole world. He was going to do what he was going to do, regardless of anything. That truly showed that he was insane. Gacy did not fit into that classic insanity defense. He hid the victims of his crime. But that was our only defense. We had no other defense to the case. Our only defense was insanity. So our theory of the case, he was mentally ill, and he did not belong in the death penalty, nor in prison. He belonged in a mental health facility where he could get treatment for the rest of his life. We didn't think he should ever be released because he would kill again. He couldn't control it.
To the best of my recollection, a book was found in his attic, and that book was a criminal law and procedure book, and it was bookmarked to the chapter on insanity defenses. So Gacy was clever. I think he was planning it.
Our job was to show them that he was so meticulous and so prepared, so knowing and so cunning, so purposeful, that he did know exactly what he was doing, that he was not suffering from the kind of mental illness that will get you as an insanity defense, or even one that would qualify as extreme emotional distress.
There were a lot of people who said at the time, wow, this is a slam dunk case, isn't it? An easy case. But I was scared still. Because some of my friends are saying, Terry, he's got to be nuts, right? And I'm like, oh my God, if they're thinking that, what's a jury going to think?
Judge John White would grant motions filed by Gacy's defense attorney and would allow private as well as clinical psychiatric examination of Gacy.
We had some very respected physicians, psychiatrists, including the local Dr. Richard Rappaport.
I was appointed as the primary expert witness for the defense. My job was to evaluate John Wayne Gacy to determine if he had any psychiatric illnesses And my usual way was to take a history from the day the person's born.
Let's go back all the way back to when you were younger. What's John Gacy's nickname?
I was always building, always wanting to do something constructive. Nothing destructive, you know, like a lot of kids would like to throw stones to break windows and shit like that. No, I was more interested in how the flowers grew. I'd rather sit and listen to the Nutcracker Suite or Beethoven's Fifth or Tchaikovsky's music. You know, some of the greats.
When Gacy was growing up, he questioned his masculinity because he was short and fat, and he didn't think he was very athletic. He seemed to have some sort of illness with almost every system of his body.
I wasn't a normal run-of-the-mill kid, so consequently, I guess I didn't have the macho image. You know, the sickly little footwork.
He was a hypochondriac. He also believed he had an upside-down heart. He called it a bottle heart. And he said the doctors told him that when he was a kid, that his heart was upside. He believed this stuff.
My dad's attitude was I was dumb and stupid and I would never amount to anything. I just could never please him.
His father was the aggressor. He would do something to help his father with good intentions, but he would always be criticized no matter what he did. If the paint ran down the side of the can, his father would criticize him for that.
My dad was also Jekyll and Hyde. When he was sober, he was, you know, the nicest person you'd want to be around. My dad would drink, and when he drank, he was belligerent, stubborn. And if us kids did something wrong, you got the back of the hand, you didn't just get no lecture.
John's dad spent a lot of time in his basement. He would go down there and work and drink and yell.
To my dad, the basement was a sacred place. It was a hiding place for him. He had locks on every goddamn thing. He even had signs, keep your goddamn hands off this, or keep the fuck out of the basement.
Like his mother's softness, her genteel attitude compared to the father, and her underwear was symbolic of that. Yeah, had his conflicts about his sexuality, which led him to try her underwear. He was attracted to that.
How did your mother react to you when she had found that you were taking underwear?
She made me wear it. And she punished me with it. She said if I ever get caught with it again, she'd make me go down the street with it on. It was punishment.
His father was giving his mother attention, the sexual attention, and he wasn't getting it.
You can't just say that you're sick because you got a physical problem or a mental problem. You got to look at it, was I doing some of it deliberately or intentionally to draw sympathy or understanding or recognition that I'm existing? Even though I wasn't healthy as a kid, I was still there and I wanted attention.
The psychiatric and psychological reports, in my opinion, demonstrated that Gacy, he was a neurotic psychopath, an obsessive compulsive behavior, the way he buried the bodies.
In Rockford, Illinois today, jury selection begins for a mass murder trial that will actually be conducted in Chicago.
The hope is that this, along with sequestering the jury, will assure Gacy a fair trial.
I've been living in Rockford most of my life. I got out of the Marine Corps and we came back and made a life for ourselves, got married, that kind of thing. And then next thing I know, I get jury duty.
You want to try to get jurors that are going to sort of lean toward your end. Gacy, we were looking for people who are going to be compassionate, of course not be willing to pull the plug.
I think one of the major questions that I remember was asked, would you have difficulty giving the death penalty? And for me, I didn't really have an issue with that.
Are you getting a little scared, Jack?
Can I tell you? No, I'm not scared.
Because you know that's perfectly normal.
But I'm not scared. I just feel that I'm being cheated again in my life. If you commit a crime, you should know you did it before you go on trial for it. But if I don't even know, and you're going to go into court and argue a case that we're not even sure I committed, then it's heavier for me to handle.
Before trial, I would have the same nightmare every night. The nightmare was I would leave the criminal courthouse after work, walk up into the parking garage, the second level where I've always parked my car, and Gacy would be standing next to my car with his arms folded, leaning against the front fender. And I would wake up totally drenched. And I had that dream over and over and over again.
Oh, the other night I had a dream which was crazy. The Essex Hotel where the jury is had a fire. 5 people died. 5 from 16 leaves only 11, which means there would have been no jury.
They say if you think about your dreams, you can figure it out.
Well, is it? Am I trying to tell myself that I don't want the end to come?
That's a possibility.
You certainly wouldn't let 11 make a decision, would you? That's the first time I've ever had any dream like that, or anything about the case. About any of the victims, or about anything in the past.
The murder trial of John Gacy did indeed get underway today with opening statements from the prosecution and the defense.
Prosecutor Robert Egan described the gruesome deaths of 33 men, all of them young, slight, blondish. The jury sat in stunned silence, barely moving. Gacy, he told them, is a thoughtful, rational, premeditated, evil man, adding, "If there's another as evil among us, God help us all."
I can handle Egan, and I can stomach Sullivan. Kunkel I can't stand. Just an egotistical bastard.
And Kunkel is bisexual. The prosecutor. Leather and a motorbike.
How did you know that?
Because I have seen him at the bar down at Illinois and Park Street.
Did he see you?
How the fuck would he see me? He wouldn't even know who I was. I didn't know who he was either. You put the goddamn leather jacket on him, the leather pants on him, and you know who the hell it is exactly. That one fucking time I was in court, I was almost pissed off enough to tell him, get that bisexual off the goddamn case.
But was it a flaming sissy biker leather or something or other? I have a motorcycle or two. But other than that, not an apt description. He was afraid I'd trip him up. And he was right to be afraid.
What is the major thing that's upsetting you so much?
Because I don't know what the fuck I'm supposed to be doing in that courtroom. And they haven't told me. Or do I stand up and fight when I think I'm right, or do I just keep my fucking mouth shut all the time?
Gacy stared straight ahead and showed no emotion as parents of the murder victims testified.
Probably the hardest part was listening to parents, family members, and just almost feeling the way they felt. There is a atmosphere created just by their presence, and it overwhelms you at times.
Just like to see him, suffer him like he suffered my son.
We were very concerned about personalizing each victim and who they were and where they came from, and the circumstances of how they got into this situation. Certain families were more involved generally, and that you would see them. There were some that would be there every day. There were some that wanted to talk to the media all the time. and others that would have nothing whatsoever to do with the media.
What does a mother go through to have the boys bring him up right, and then somebody comes along, snuffs their lives out?
I was walking out of court one day, and Mr. Peast came walking right toward me, and I'm like, oh no. And he said, Mr. Amaranti, I just want to tell you that I hold no malice toward you, and I respect the fact that you're doing your job. I will always remember that. It was one of the classiest things that's ever happened to me since I started practicing law almost 50 years ago now.
I remember being there when Gacy's mom testified. She was elderly at the time, and she was put up there to try to show that Gacy had been beaten as a child downstairs where his dad would go down and drink. And I felt so sorry for her up there because she gets up on the stand and she just looks around and, oh, there's Johnny. You know, she pointed at her son who was sitting at the defense table. I thought that could have been anybody's mother who was up there.
Mother was a good witness.
Yeah, she was good. She acted right from the heart. She was a very good witness.
Yeah.
So tomorrow's doctor day.
Yes, tomorrow's the doctor day.
That's with all the psychiatric evaluations and all the doctors that have been working with you.
Yeah.
Trial was a very simple issue. Was he insane or was he evil?
Dr. Rappaport in court, he put up a billboard and he had an onion drawn on it. And he said, Gacy is like an onion. And you have to peel back layers to get to the core of this man.
They asked me did I think he was insane, and I said I did. He had brief psychotic episodes. That's the state he was in when he was doing the murders. He went into episodes of insanity when it was with a situation that depicted the relationship he had with his father, and he was sane enough in between these episodes to cover his behavior up. His father essentially victimized him in the basement of his own home as he was growing up. Gacy tried to reproduce that behavior with his victims. And so all these dead bodies that he put in the basement was like himself been buried by his father.
And he's the one that was dumb and stupid. He was projecting that dumb and stupid on his victims. He figured if he killed them, he was basically killing himself over and over and over again.
Once the defense raises any evidence of insanity at the time of the crime, the burden falls on the state to prove sanity at the time of the crime. We're presenting experts that are saying, in their opinion, everything he did was premeditated. Therefore, Gacy was not mentally ill.
Jim Cavanaugh was a state psychiatrist. At one time, a very crucial part of the trial, he said that Gacy would probably be released from a mental institution if he was found not guilty by reason of insanity. He just kind of blurted it out. It was too much and totally irrelevant to the facts of the case. Would that have happened in the John Gacy case? Absolutely not. That'd be like letting Speck out on parole or Manson. So I don't think it's a practical matter Gacy would have ever gotten out. The jury should not have heard that.
Judge told the jury to disregard the remarks made by the witness and the attorney. Well, what the fuck have you done? He planted that one seed that you didn't want planted. And that is, if you find him not guilty by reason of insanity, that he will go free.
I was only maybe 10, 11 when the trial was happening. I remember thinking, the focus is always on Gacy.
The trial of John Gacy. John Gacy would face arraignment.
The testimony about Gacy had been horrifying.
I remember we would watch national news more than we would watch local news at that time. I remember the images of him. I have like flashes of that. And there was no getting away from it.
Sitting there every day, I've enjoyed it. I've been in the limelight. I like being the center of attraction. But I think I earned it too.
How'd you earn it?
Nobody else had the guts to pull off what I pulled off and got away with it. If I won the case, I could sit there and laugh for a fucking hour. You stupid son of a bitch. I outsmarted you again.
All the way through closing arguments, we thought we had a shot. Small shot.
What I try to do with Gacy, I try to convince the jury to find him not guilty by reason of insanity, to study him, so we could stop this from happening in the future. I thought my argument was pretty decent. Then Kunkel got to get up.
I had him put the crawl space opening right in front of the jury box. When I go to the victim board, I take each photo out, rip it out, actually tore a couple out, so there's a big snap. I said, you want to show mercy to this killer, you show the same mercy that he showed when he took these lives off the face of the earth and put them here. And I threw them in the crawl space opening, let them bounce off the front wall of the jury and all over the tile floor. And there was the big exhale and then total silence.
When he threw those pictures in the crawl space, if it wasn't over before that, it was over then. Very, very, very emotional, very, very theatrical, and very good. Very, very good.
We went over to the Jeans, the local watering hole near the courthouse, and we expected to be there for a while.
We got in there, just ordered the first round of drinks, and the phone rang. The jury was back. Like, oh man, so they're back already.
By the time we got into that room where we were finally going to make some decisions, there was nobody in the room that says, I want to talk about this insanity thing. John Wayne Gacy made his own choices. And so that makes him completely sane, in my point of view.
It took the jury of 7 men and 5 women less than 2 hours to find John Wayne Gacy guilty of murdering 33 young men. Gacy was convicted of murdering more people than anyone else in U.S. history.
When the verdict was read and John Wayne Gacy was in there, my eyes went to him. I did not see emotion. I did not see anything. I almost felt like he expected it.
What went through your mind when you heard that verdict?
Oh, I was just delighted. We knew all along that he was guilty and that, but there's an area of doubt that, you just have to hand back until the verdict actually comes in. And it's just a relief to all of us that this is the verdict.
I think I had just a sense of, it's over, and we're glad it's over, and you thought you were going to get away with it, and you didn't. All because of that little piece of paper that they had found in Gacy's house.
I hope he does get the electric chair. Then it'll make everybody feel better. I'm sure it'll make the other mothers feel better, too.
John Wayne Gacy will be back in court later today. So will the jury start considering the penalty for his crimes.
And that's when it was very, very difficult. Because ultimately, you have to realize that this is about somebody dying. I was definitely fearful that the judicial system would have allowed him to get out at any time. And I just couldn't tolerate that.
John Wayne Gacy was convicted of 33 murders and sentenced to die.
I felt great when the jury sentenced Gacy to death. It's what he deserved.
Very pleased. Very happy for the people of Illinois.
The only way there'll ever be a justice and a balancing of the scales of justice in this case is when he dies. Period.
Gacy's chief counsel rushed by, refusing comment.
Boy, oh boy, it was devastating for me and Mata. I mean, you wouldn't think it would be, but it was devastating. All the arguing we did, all the research we did, all the blood, sweat, and tears. We broke down. It was very emotional, and Gacy was like consoling us.
This is Sam. Sam, I said, you gotta understand one thing. I said, you guys went up against a brick wall. You weren't fighting my case, you were fighting society, the entire state of Illinois.
And then when Gacy got taken back to the bullpen, he wanted to talk to Bill Kunkel.
So I go in the back, no one's around, it's just the two of us. And they said, I think the jury did the right thing finding me guilty, but I don't think they should have given me the death penalty. I said, really? Why not? And he said, well, they didn't hear the whole story. I said, well, I'll tell you what, John. I've given myself the next 3 weeks off. I got nothing to do. We can sit down. You can tell me anything you want. He started to laugh. And then, of course, I laughed. I said, that's what I thought, asshole. I'll see you at the execution.
Do you feel any relief now that it's over with, John?
How can you feel relief for something that you still don't understand? You know, everybody seems to think that I haven't got the right proper affect for it. Well, maybe I don't.
Well, how do they feel you
But
should
how,
feel?
you know, because they say I'm guilty, I'm supposed to feel guilty now? I don't. I have no remorse.
After a while, after he starts sitting in prison, he starts going to the law library and so forth. He attacked, the effectiveness of his representation, that he didn't kill all these people.
If you want to charge me with anything, charge me with complicity in 2 of the murders.
Just 2?
That's all I know about.
That's his story, that he didn't kill anyone. Just an accomplice, he says, and that he helped dispose of 2. One of them, Robert Peast, who was 15 years old when he went to the house on Summerdale.
Eventually he got to the point where he said he didn't kill any of them.
Mark my words, I'm going to get out, and when I get out, I'm going to settle a score.
Hey, you're going to get out.
I am going to get out.
For 14 years, serial killer John Wayne Gacy has been living on appeals.
It was like reading a book, and you couldn't get to that last chapter because we weren't in charge of finishing the book. So we waited for that death sentence to really become a death.
A mass killer who has been in jail for 15 years faces execution next May. The U.S. Supreme Court rejected what is seen as the last viable appeal last October.
In a Chicago parade today, the call was death to Gacy.
He's going to get what he deserves.
For condemned serial killer John Wayne Gacy, it is almost time.
So I say go ahead and pull the chain.
And after 14 years, long overdue.
The day after he was found guilty, they should execute him.
The rest of the world thought he was a monster, but he was my client and he was a human being, and I lost the case, and I didn't want to see him executed.
Bob Egan and Greg Badeau and I were 3 official state witnesses.
Officials at the Illinois State Penitentiary held a lottery of sorts, throwing the names of 95 news media outlets into a hat. Walter Jacobson will watch.
I received a notice that my name was drawn and that I would be a witness to the execution. It was at the state prison in Joliet.
Well, penitentiary sent a bus over to pick us up to take us to the building where the execution was going to take place.
The yard was echoing with prisoners' voices saying, "Goodbye, John. Goodbye, John. You're okay, John. Don't worry about it." When I got to the little execution chamber, it smelled dank.
I was hoping that Gacy would be completely unglued, screaming and hollering and crying. I wanted him to be afraid. I wanted him to suffer like all his victims did and all his victims' families did. I mean, you know, come on.
Hey, I got news for you. I killed 33 times. You're only gonna kill me once. Gacy outsmarted him again.
told that his last words were, "Kiss my ass." I think they brought that up for the media's benefit. I didn't hear it, personally. He took one deep breath, and that was the end of it. Closed his eyes, and he was gone.
Jack, if you were about to do all over again, is there anything that you want to change?
I would think if it was explained the way I want to explain it.
I had no sympathy for him. I had nothing for him. Just nothing.
I felt relief. The relief came simply knowing that there'd be no other children that John Wayne Gacy would kill.
I think it's critical for us to not only unravel what, but to unravel why. Because the bottom line is, for all we know, there's another person out there doing the same thing right now.
I never stopped thinking that the average guy in the street could be a serial murderer. That's the only reason I'm talking to you today. People need to be aware, they need to be a little more careful.
While Gacy has been arrested, charged, convicted, and executed for his crimes, that's only one part of the justice. Other part is returning a little dignity. And part of dignity is having a name. In about 2010, as I was going through some of the files, I noticed 8 of Gacy's 33 victims were never identified. We thought about how could we use DNA technology to resolve those. And that sort of is what started off us reopening the Gacy case.
The police dug up the 8 sets of remains and sent them to this lab at the University of North Texas for DNA analysis.
We could not think of another set of victims that deserved a second chance at identification than these boys.
Because of all of this work, victim number 19 is never going to be known by a number anymore. Victim 19 was William George Bundy.
Bill Bundy just had turned 19 years old, lived on the north side of the city. Said he was going to a party, and he never was heard from or seen again. 2017, another family came forward. Jimmy Hawkinson, young man from Minnesota, told his mother that he was going to go to Chicago and have some fun. The Hawkinson family was always left wondering, is he alive? We collected the DNA that allowed us to identify Jimmy Hawkinson as victim number 24. There are 6 remaining unidentified victims of John Gacy, and I'm hopeful that other victims will be identified and other families won't have to live in that cruel limbo any longer.
They all were human beings who deserved to live and to be respected and that somebody loved. And none of them deserved what happened to them.
With all of his victims, you've got a mother, a father, or you got a brother and a sister. And all of those people that are never going to see their son again. And then to think of all the people that they played baseball with, all of his best friends, how it's affected their life all the way till today.
The ripple effect of that crime never goes away. I think that's why 40 years later we're still talking about it, because the huge and the vastness of its effect.
But there's also, you know, the decades of those moments that we didn't get to have. I've become friends with some of Mike's friends. They've shared stories with me, and they still miss him. They still get together. They still toast him. I've always wanted to be able to say, hey, Mike was here. I think that's probably what I would want for people to know about all these boys. Sorry. Is that they were here. Otherwise, they're just a number. Another victim. And that's what I would want people to know. It is a gift to get to know how loved he was. We all should be remembered by the lives we lived and not how we died.
Kidding me?
Success means redeployment. Failure means elimination. Gas is closing in. Get to the new safe zone. Hostile UAV in the area. Your squad mate is the most wanted target. Eliminate threats and secure supply caches to reduce the time at the contract. Move to the safe zone. We've got gas moving in. Moving here. This one's dead. Enter indicated location. They were no match for me. Enemies are dropping into the area. Watch the skies. Gas is moving in. New safe zone location. Fire sale active. Fire station point.